Thank you for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each day to introduce you to our network of business and community leaders and to discuss important issues that impact business in Colorado and the region. I'm Tammy Schaefer, your on-air producer, and today we are connecting with Jon Ekstrom of Deft Communications. We have a great opportunity to talk about some unique partnerships that kind of setting things in motion here in Colorado.
That's right. Thanks, Tammy. It's great to be back, and always a pleasure to come on Connect and Collaborate and provide some exposure for some people in my orbit that I really adore. And on the show today, one of my dear friends, I think I met you at a 4th of July barbecue at your house more than a decade ago, Cindy Sovine. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much
Welcome,
for having
Cindy.
me. Yes, thank you.
And Cindy, you've got kind of a long and impressive career working in politics in and around the state capitol. Can you give us a little bit of insight into your background and how you got into politics?
Yeah, absolutely. I started my first legislative session in 1999 as a legislative aide for 3 state representatives. And
what part of the state was that?
It was they were Eastern Colorado, Aurora, and the southern part of the state.
Okay, because you grew up like eastern part of the state, right?
Yeah. I grew up out in Deer Trail, Colorado, which is on I-70 East. My family are cattle ranchers and wheat farmers. But I had a great civics teacher in high school who noticed I had a knack for arguing with him on everything. So he
comes in handy,
right?
Eventually.
So he was really instrumental in getting me to facilitating a day where I shadowed our state representative. And I remember showing up at the Capitol and just seeing this insanity that is the inside of those chambers when they're doing business. And everybody's talking over each other and papers are flying everywhere. And I just fell in love with it.
And then they're taking votes. And
they're taking votes. And
it's chaos, right?
It's chaos.
Which rep was that?
It was Representative Brad Young at the time. So, yeah.
Excellent. And so you started working at the Capitol. You were working for 3 legislators. How long did that last for?
One session.
Just one?
Yeah, and then I went to work for the Office of Legislative Counsel, where I staff assisted the health committees, the mentally ill and the criminal justice system committee, and then I also coordinated the ballot initiative process. So,
okay. What does that mean, coordinating the ballot initiative process?
So in the state of Colorado, you can, as a citizen, file an initiative, and it has to be treated like an actual attempt to amend the statutes or the Constitution through our citizen-initiated process. And so there is a system by which that has to be handled, and it includes having attorneys review the language and see how it can be refined to the style of the statutes, as well as working with the Secretary of State's office on titling the measure and
making sure there's single subject.
Right, single subject requirements. And I've seen everything from, really extensive measures around tax things to things like make war illegal written on a cocktail napkin that have been, you have to treat them all the same. But anyways, point being, I got a really great experience in Leg Council learning the legislative process without a political tail. And then in 2003, I made the switch to lobbying. I worked in-house for the Colorado Hospital Association.
What facilitated the switch to lobbying? Why?
I always wanted to do it.
Oh, really?
I was working my way through my degree. So until I got my degree, they were really not looking at hiring you for a lobbying position. So as soon as I got my degree, I was like, all right, thanks, Ledge. See you later. And went over to Hospital Association, where I worked for a year. And then I switched to contract lobbying, which was much better for my personality fit, being able to juggle multiple issues and do a lot of different things and have lots of moving pieces. But then I also noticed very quickly that I had this Jerry Maguire syndrome, that if I didn't enjoy what I was working for, I was, not going to be as passionate an advocate for it. And
Did you write a memo, the things we think but do not say?
No, I actually started my own company.
Okay, good.
And then, I just
I
skipped the memo.
Yeah.
And started my own company in 2006, and I've been a political consultant ever since. And I do lobbying. That's certainly one thing that I do, but I also do public relations. I work with any number of groups to offer end-to-end solutions for government relations. So I do regulatory regulatory work. I do rule making. I do procurement, which is I help companies that are seeking to do business with the state and its local governments be able to navigate that process and all sorts of things like that. And so
one thing I always liked about working with you was because we worked together on a few things, notably the Early Childhood Education Association of Colorado. We did a campaign for them, is that some lobbyists don't understand that the skills that they have in the House, building coalitions, building consensus, making an argument, winning people over, applies outside of the walls too. But one thing I always liked about you was how can we embolden our efforts under the dome with efforts outside the dome, and how can they work together? It's funny, some lobbyists end up just trapped sort of in a prison of their own mind where they go, I have to work the channels entirely through this one venue. And you always took a more holistic view of that, which I appreciated, certainly, because A, it meant business, and B, it meant, okay, you get it, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's really truly that I have always jumped into issues that I believed in, and so I look at what's the quickest pathway to the mountaintop. Sometimes that involves stepping out of my comfort zone and doing some things that need to be done.
You mentioned that you could only work on things for which you had a passion, because otherwise you're not going to care. The work product may suffer as a result of that. What types of industries were you working on at the time?
Well, I'd always had an interest in helping people and working with women and children, primarily.
Right.
But that ultimately manifested in working with hospitals, insurance companies, pharmaceutical industry, other things along those lines.
So, I mean, tangentially related, or, in a lot of cases directly related to the things that you care about, but you end up getting pulled in a lot of directions where you go, oh, okay, this may not be the exact fit. And I think the reason I'm sort of couching it this way is I'm setting up the rest of our conversation in later segments. But real quick, a lot of people believe that lobbyists shouldn't exist or that they are evil. What would you say to people who think that?
Oh, they're a necessary evil. I mean, I guess that's what I would say. I think that lobbyists are some of the most important connections to actually making sure that facts are being delivered in a meaningful and consistent way to legislators who are voting on issues. And so they are a necessary evil in this process. And we can talk more about that if you want.
We will. And we'll get to that in the next segment. Cindy Sovine is our guest. And Tammy, look forward to another great conversation.
Absolutely. We'll be back with more with Jon Ekstrom as we talk about unique partnerships here on Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us. Glad you're staying with us today here on Connect and Collaborate. And today we are talking about unique partnerships with Jon Ekstrom of Deft Communications. Jon, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you, Tammy. And it's funny thinking about unique partnerships because in my business, what I do, Deft Communications is a consulting firm. We do content, training, and engagement. You can find us on the web at deftcom.us. That's deftcom.us. I have to search kind of far and wide to achieve the complex policy goals that I hope to achieve, or that my clients hope to achieve. And one of the people that I've been fortunate enough to connect with has been Cindy Sovine over the years. And we've connected on a number of different projects, and you've been on my show that I do outside of this a number of times. Cindy, where can people find you before we get any further? Where's the best place to keep up with your work?
Yeah, you can access me on my website, www.sovineconsulting.com. I think that's probably the easiest.
I think that's probably best. Yeah, that's sort of the centralized repository for all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, definitely.
But we were talking in the last segment about how you did work that you cared about, and that manifested a lot in healthcare. And so you were doing work for hospitals, the pharmaceutical industry, but a couple of years ago that changed. Can you talk about the evolution of going from that to what you're doing now?
Yes, absolutely. My dad got lymphatic cancer, and I was with him through 2 years of chemo and radiation and 3 surgeries later where we chased it all over but never really did much of anything. And so I experienced from a patient's perspective what this status quo within the healthcare delivery system looks like for the sick and the dying. And it was something that really just struck me as awful. And I really had to look at it from a standpoint of a lot of the policies that I had done had really put a lot of the status quo in place. But
well, I mean, that had to be excruciating personally, but and additionally almost professionally annoying as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, then, so my mom, after a month in the hospital with my dad on morphine and methadone, just a vegetable waiting to die, unable to really do anything for himself, my mom had furiously been doing all of this research on cannabis online with, no scientific research to back any of it up, and decided to take him home and start to put him on this tea that she made out of weed.
Wow.
That she acquired from different dispensaries, and she boiled it for hours because she read somewhere that unlocked different properties that increased their healing potential for it. And she started putting it in his GI tube.
Just consulting Dr. Google.
Dr. Google.
Wow.
And I was mortified. Actually
sure.
at the time was like, Mom, there's no research. You don't have anything to back this up.
And you've got all this institutional knowledge from years of working
Right.
on policies, right?
I think I know everything.
Right.
Yeah, no. So she did it anyways because she's awesome and she has great boundaries. And
Certainly.
I got to watch him return to a state of functionality that he did not have without the cannabis.
He came out of the fog, right?
Well, he came out of the fog. I actually literally watched the tumor on his neck shrink from the size of a grapefruit to the size of the baseball
Oh my
over
gosh.
the 2.5 month period that I experienced watching what was going on. But he was able to do things that, going from a vegetable to being able to walk, to shower yourself, to be able to do things that you were not able to do, to say your goodbyes.
Right.
He ultimately did pass away. He had so many different complications from the surgeries and the many forms of treatment that he got sick and it settled into his lungs. And it's often the story that you hear so many times, but he was very much a believer that had he started cannabis early on when he had gotten that original diagnosis as part of this treatment, that
Right.
he would still be alive today.
Wow.
And so, that to me was the moment where I had this aha, oh shit, what do I do? I'm sorry, what do I do now? And it was a little bit terrifying when you face, a future of, do I continue perpetuating the status quo that I'd really worked with to help these companies? Or do I look at how do I help cannabis, which is this plant, this seed that you put into the ground and you water it and it grows and it helps people? Like, how do I help this plant and the people who use it to be able to continue to do so and have access to it in a way that isn't Dr. Google,
Right, yeah.
And so I actually let go of all of my healthcare clients completely. I just stepped away from my entire career. I really felt called to do so.
And that's certainly understandable given what you went through. Did you face any backlash from that from your clients? Or when you transitioned into advocating for cannabis, were they upset with you?
So the first bill that I worked on in cannabis was Jack's Law in 2016, and that was a bill that required school districts to allow cannabis on on school property and to allow it to be administered by the child. And I faced a significant amount of opposition from my former colleagues on that piece of legislation because cannabis and children are, controversial in and of itself, but then making schools have to require that they violate federal law and have marijuana on their property was a whole nother ball game.
Right.
And so, I definitely completely did a 180, and there's still today many people who are not terribly thrilled about that.
Interesting. Why is it called Jack's Law?
Jack's Law is named after Jack Split, the young man that really inspired the legislation. And this happened in a school in Jefferson County where he was kicked out of school and had his patch, his transdermal cannabis patch, which administered as anti-seizure medication, ripped off of him.
Someone ripped it off of him?
So the school nurse ripped it off of him, made him leave school property without his medication, and then called social services on his mother, even though he had a medical card and permission to have this medicine and was under the treatment of a doctor and all of these things. They made this judgment call that this was just unacceptable. And so
they just drew a hard line.
So they took this kid's seizure medicine away from him. And anyways, Jack was an amazing kid. He was completely the inspiration for this, as there are so many other kids across the state that suffer from debilitating conditions, because Colorado has actually really become a medical refugee state for children with severe disorders that the pharmaceutical industry or the traditional drugs available in the market and the healthcare delivery system today aren't treating effectively. So
interesting. You mentioned, and I can understand that this would be controversial, but that law passed.
Yeah, 93 out of 100 legislators voted in support of that law. Yeah.
That's an impressive margin. I mean, you hear about polarization in politics and, why is everything so partisan? But, I mean, that's wildly bipartisan.
Yeah, and I completely credit the moms and the kids to that effort. I mean,
really?
they brought it. And what are you going to tell a mother who has, fought for her child and has gone through every single round of possible drug combinations you can think of, and this is the only thing that's not damaging their organs to the point of death by 15?
Yeah, or create how many other horrible symptoms from the medication.
Side effects.
A mother who has worked diligently to find the correct thing or the correct combination of things that enhances their child's quality of life. Who are you to take that away from them?
Exactly.
That's remarkable. I'm struck by that, because that to me is almost a paradigm shift as it pertains to cultural understanding of cannabis.
Yeah.
Is that a challenge for you? Because I think, given the war on drugs that we've experienced in this country for decades upon decades, is it difficult for you? Is it a challenge to subvert or change the perceptions of cannabis?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that everything is constantly in motion around cannabis, and I think that Jack's Law should pass in every single state because it gives people a different perspective of what this plant is being used for. So absolutely, it was a paradigm shift. I mean, when I said 93 out of 100 legislators voted in support, that included 35 unanimous support in the Republicanly controlled Senate.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, that has never happened on a marijuana bill before, and I'm not sure that it will again. And I think that it was definitely a moment where everybody even took a moment to stand in honor of those kids that had come so bravely to tell their story and face the stigmatization that, they had to have this medicine that was keeping them alive. So it was like, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life to be able to be a part of it. And to answer your question on changing paradigms, I realized very quickly that I now found myself right in the middle of war on drugs. I began working with Drug Policy Alliance on a number of those issues, as well as I went straight to social use for the issue of social use for marijuana, because I believed that social use and people being able to consume together without fear of being thrown in jail or being reprimanded is the quickest path to normalization and getting people around this stigma. So.
Well, certainly, and I would say there's a gap that exists in terms of marijuana regulations in the city and in the state, because it's legal to own it, it's legal to buy it, it's everything is legal except for where you can consume it, and unless you own a home, and sometimes if you own a home, you like an apartment or a condo, perhaps you are prohibited from using there. So there is a gap in terms of consumption.
There's a huge gap, and we are literally, people are getting in trouble for it. So we have tourists that have nowhere to go, so they're just doing it openly on the street in 16th Street Mall. Patients have nowhere to consume other than at their home with their kids and their pets and their, places that we don't want that necessarily happening. And, we've really been trying to figure out what is the right balance to protect patients and retail consumers who choose marijuana over alcohol or other products, and how do you protect their rights while balancing those that do not like marijuana? And that is a conversation that we are just right in the middle of.
Right,
for sure.
And we're certainly not here to relitigate legalization.
Yeah.
How do we best implement it? And we'll get into that more in the next segment. So, Cindy,
Excellent.
Thank you for sharing your story. Very, very powerful.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll talk more about unique partnerships and talking with Cindy Sovine here on Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us. Right after the break, we will have much more. Thanks so much for staying with us today here on Connect and Collaborate. We are talking about unique partnerships with Jon Ekstrom of Deft Communications.
Thanks, Tammy. Fascinating conversation here with Cindy Sovine.
Yeah.
Evolving from advocating for pharmaceuticals to now cannabis. And one of the things that we talked about in the last segment was the gap that exists in terms of social use, because Colorado legalized recreational or retail marijuana in 2012, right? And regulations were implemented 13, 14, what was it?
13.
13. And then, but one thing that was missing from that was where you could consume legally outside of your home, and nothing like that existed, which is certainly a gap because people started coming here, and so you have tourists who can buy, it's legal to buy, but it is illegal to do that anywhere but you own a home. So you are now at the forefront of that. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing to address social use, or maybe the history of how social use has evolved, and especially in terms of the city of Denver.
Yeah. There's two different pathways to go there, and I'll start with the state level. Continues to be a gap in terms of where people can actually consume marijuana, though they're allowed to possess and consume it. They just have nowhere unless they have their home, which isn't then somehow precluded by the adjoining walls or all sorts of different caveats and things that
and there's some question about whether or not you can even do it in your own backyard,
right?
Or like your own balcony. Right?
So yeah, John, that's the legislation I was getting at. So when the regulations passed, there was this task force that came up with all these recommendations, and they went live with these recommendations, and then they implemented them. And 2014, we saw sales, and so that's where things went. But what ultimately happened was that we didn't address the issue. The task force recommended that they create a definition of what open and public consumption would look like, so that local governments would have a tool to be able to address it in their own unique way. That never went anywhere. So instead of having that tool, all local governments, whether it be all 64 counties or the hundreds of municipalities across the state, have been left to either do nothing and look the other way, or try to go out on your own and come up with some creative mechanism by which you allow social consumption.
So instead of having a useful tool or something that we could actually implement, we got the alternative.
Yeah.
Nothing.
We just pretend like it's not going to happen. I mean, we know it's legal, and we know people are buying a lot of it,
Let's
but
just
we
stick
just
our heads in the sand.
Yeah, pretty much.
Fun.
So,
all right.
So anyways, that was pretty my time, because I was still very pretentious and lobbying in the pharmaceutical world at that point, and hadn't really made the switches in terms of understanding what I do now. And so I came in now, I've really charged into this social use issue, just knowing that this is what needs to happen in order to really normalize marijuana in general. And we tried to put an open and public definition in this last legislative session. We got to the very end of the process, and then it ended up getting hijacked by the Republican bill sponsor in the Senate, who put an amendment on that said that you could have up to 5 people smoking on your front porch, but if it was 6, it was a felony. So we really felt as though that went the wrong direction for where we were at. It made it unenforceable almost, and how did you prove that they pointed past the joint to,
Right.
Anyways, it ultimately ended up with a big flash of Party of 5 being up on the House floor in the final hours of session, and it turned into a joke, which was really sad because it's not a joke. But fortunately, the bill died, and you can have as many people on your front porch as you want, so long as you live in a city that hasn't precluded it.
Gotcha.
And anyways, that's definitely going to be back on the table this year in the legislative session for 2018 for sure, in a number of different varietals. And then, of course, I-300, which was passed by Denver voters this last year in 2016. That was now implemented by the city, and they are accepting applications. They've been doing so for a number of months and hadn't received any. They do have one, but they've got that particular application, they've got a lot of challenges. Everybody who's looking to apply does, because there's a very strong number of regulations that go even beyond what the current marijuana industry has to abide by. So it makes it very difficult to find a location within the city of Denver. So if you looked at a map of Denver, it'd pretty much be bright red in terms of where you could apply, except for on some of the industrial areas where nobody wants to go.
Right.
And you can open up a social use place there, but then you have to find a way to get people to come there.
Right.
When you can't also drink alcohol or, have other venues that are available to you or things to do. So it's hard to make a workable business model that is sustainable. And that's what we want, are good operators that have thought out good business models and found good locations and have funding. And so anyways, it'll be interesting to see how it works. But that's something that I'm working on as well.
Right. You've put your money where your mouth is here.
Absolutely. I really believe that this is what we need to do, and I aligned this idea of social use with my desire to support personal and medical freedom through access to cannabis education by working to apply for legally designated consumption area for social use. And I, again, going back to recognizing that you need to make a high quality business out of this to be successful in the social use industry. I paired it with a service, a number of spa services. So you'll be able to get massages with THC-based oils and everything into, spiritual counseling, even all types of different things that are out there. Massage, acupuncture. We'll have ganja yoga classes, group meditation classes, individual meditation classes, all different types of things for different forms of healing. I think all of them have their place, including the pharmaceutical industry, though I won't be carrying any of that there.
Sure.
But it will also have a retail line of all natural cannabis products that can be sold legally in all 50 states today under the Hemp Act. So.
Wow. And what types of products then are legal in all 50 states?
Well, that's a great question. So when we first started, re-toying with this idea of cannabis, we created this artificial divide that said that if it has less than 0.3% THC, it's hemp, and it's not scary, it's fine, and we can give it to kids, and anybody can have it, and we can sell products which can go across state lines. But if it's above 0.3%, then it's called marijuana.
Okay.
And that's that's a Schedule 1 drug, and it's highly illegal. And so anyways, that's what's happened. And under the Farm Bill, which is a national bill that's passed, they have defined hemp as anything that's under 0.3%. So that includes salves and tinctures and lotions and all kinds of things that many kids are actually taking today to treat seizure disorders. But it would also include things like shampoos and conditioners and lotions and body products, even cosmetics, because we put so much attention to eating organically, but then we get our lotion from the grocery store that's loaded full of toxins, and we put it on our skin, and it goes directly into our bloodstream, which is where cancer and chronic disease is coming from. And so I am looking at this thinking I've already got an all-natural connoisseur that's coming into my doors because they prefer cannabis to alcohol. That's why they're coming to me. And I'm going to sell them a product that a line of products that give them end-to-end action to healthy living. So that will include essential oils, which is like a whole nother a whole nother level of plants that are used for natural healing and things along those lines. But we will have a number of different products and services for people.
Wow. I mean, that's a remarkable business plan. When are you targeting to get this going?
Oh man, I've been working hard on the community support and working to get with most of the community groups involved and
presumably you need funding for something like this.
Oh yeah,
as well.
Funding and location, and got those, working through all of those details. But I'm hoping to, for sure by the end of the year, but hopefully here real soon, have the application ready to go and move forward.
As we sit here on December 12th, you're looking just within the next 3 weeks?
I put down my operational plan to come talk to you, John.
Wow. Well, that is certainly flattering, but a valuable message that you're delivering to us. We'll wrap up in the fourth segment. Lots of good stuff here. Cindy Sovine, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Connect and Collaborate. Stay with us. We have more coming up after the break. We are glad to have you along here on Connect and Collaborate as we talk about unique partnerships with Jon Ekstrom of Deft Communications.
Thank you, Tammy. Deft Communications, you can find us on the web, deftcom.us. You can find Cindy Sovine at sovineconsulting.com. And Cindy, we have talked about the cannabis spa that you were looking to get going before the end of the year. Thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to sit down with us and educate us about the cannabis industry and everything that you've done. What is your ultimate goal? So you're hoping to apply by the end of the year. When do you hope to have it up and running?
Well, it's really going to depend on how long Denver takes in the process of going through and where they're at. Again, there's so many different restrictions around that they added. To get a dispensary license, you had to be 1,000 feet away from a certain number of things, and then for social use, they added daycare, swimming pools, rec centers, like this whole thing that again made the map bleed out. And
well, and as someone with background in oil and gas, it's like the setback issue.
It's exactly what it is.
I mean,
it's
the
setbacks.
same one. And it's not just like a line from one thing. It's like it's a radius.
Yeah.
And that makes citing something very, very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and when you think about the number of liquor licenses that are within the same setback issues for these places that go into the dozens and even more in some cases, it's really interesting when we were, told to regulate marijuana like alcohol.
Right.
Are we doing that? Are we doing that?
Or is it a double standard? Right.
Yeah.
Are there people who, because the cultural perceptions of cannabis, we talked about this briefly, do you meet resistance from people who say, that you're doing a spa, isn't that sort of uncouth? Or, what do you say to people who are resistant to cannabis?
I usually try to meet them where they're at with that judgment because I was there myself.
Sure.
So, it's actually for me a great thing wherever they come in at it, whether they're on the opposition side, or whether they're already in support. Right after session ended, I found myself on the airplane with the board of trustees from the Colorado Christian University.
Oh my.
And, we talked about marijuana the entire time. He just kept asking more and more questions, and it was a great opportunity to talk to him about why patients use it, and by the end he was asking where he could go to find something for his dad. I mean, it was like, I look at all of those opportunities for education and meeting people where they're at, and the spa to me is exactly what that represents, because everybody's going to face a diagnosis someday. Everybody's going to face that same choice that my dad did, that all of these people with chronic diseases do, and I want them to be able to come to some place other than Dr. Google where they can find out what research does exist, what people are using for treating various conditions, what strains, how what ratios, how they're titrating, meaning what amount they're treating themselves at, and those are things that we really need to be able to do. Well,
I think that's a good segue into the questions I want to ask you about where we see the industry going in 2018. What trends do you see coming? And before you address that, what challenges exist in terms of cannabis going into 2018?
Coming in on the later side of this and not being here from the beginning, I guess I have an outsider's perspective. I mean, this is by far and away the most heavily regulated industry in the world. And I think that Colorado started it, and they were really very conservative in their approach because they just didn't know what to expect. And they really wanted to take a thoughtful, way of looking at things. But I think now, 5 years into this, we can look and say, well, what if this is actually making sense now? Based on the intent or the goals of where we were at. And I think that there's probably some room for us to have some conversations, and one of those is around the idea of publicly traded companies or ownership within marijuana businesses. We when we set this out, said we aren't going to allow any outside publicly traded ownership in here because we don't want all of these, slimy millionaires jumping into this business and making our state look bad. I get that, actually. It seemed like a reasonable thing at the time. But where that comes in is now we have a huge problem with testing. We don't necessarily have great testing for cannabis, both medical and and retail, because there's not certified labs, that we don't have necessarily the resources, or the labs that are available to do this don't have it. And I work with a company that is the biggest testing company in the world, and they do cannabis, #1 in Europe, #1 in Canada. They can't get into Colorado because of this. So,
Wow.
the mom pause. It's just, there's a lot of different things, and so we, I think, need to look at how do we allow capital investment into this state in order to make it thrive. Otherwise, as we see states like California and Oregon and others, bigger ones that are going live, we're going to find ourselves losing all of the research and development and all of the innovation, and just having the weed.
Well, I think what you're referring to is almost like economies of scale.
Exactly.
And so that is important as an industry grows. And as legalization, I would say, has proved successful here in Colorado, it's important to look at how do we evolve it?
Yeah.
How do we continue to move it in a positive direction? I just read something today about how use among youth 12 to 17 is down since legalization. And anecdotally, that makes sense to me, because I remember when I was in high school, it was harder to get alcohol than it was to get weed.
Right.
And the reason is the black market.
Yeah.
Instead of having to go to a place where someone checks ID and is behind the counter, you could just buy it from someone who knows. And now that the legalization has evolved how the black market works, I think it's more difficult to get if you're a youth. And part of what our tax dollars go to is towards education and enforcement.
Absolutely.
So understanding that, I think we move the industry in a positive direction to where it's more beneficial for all: medical, retail, youth, everyone.
Absolutely. Another cool bill that I get the honor to work on this year is called a fiber recycling bill. And what happens now in the marijuana industry is when you take off all that flower that is either harvested and sold or made into oil or edibles or whatever, you have what's left with that stalk and the stems and everything else. And currently by law, they're required to chop that up and mix it with dirt and throw it in the trash, to a tune of almost 1 million pounds we're throwing in the landfill a day. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so I'm running legislation to create a certification for recyclers who can come and pick up all of that fiber and make really great stuff out of it that actually has the potential to reduce our dependence on foreign materials. Everything is possible from, fiber, and it's marijuana fiber, but we also have hemp fiber, and we've got all of these things that we can, work together. It's all one plant. I'm just saying.
Well, and to look at this from a slightly different angle, you are essentially mandating waste.
Yeah.
Which is, that's not where we want to go on the earth.
Yeah, borders on ridiculous.
And not only that, but they actually require you to use gas-powered choppers indoors to do this, because it's a locked, enclosed seed-to-sale system. So you're not allowed to do it outside, because otherwise you've taken your product outside of the seed-to-sale system. So there's a lot of issues that this solves by giving them an alternative that is much safer within the industry. And to be clear, so that I don't get anybody in trouble, I think most people have figured out workarounds. But it's the ridiculousness of the conflict of thinking, how far do we need to go to
don't let that
protect this trash
covered in dirt.
at the extent of the gasoline fumes? Are they going to have canaries flying around until one drops? We got to stop now. Let's just shut this one off. We'll get back to it tomorrow.
What's funny is it certainly speaks to both. It's exciting to be first. It's exciting to be on the leading edge of any new industry, but there are also challenges associated with that, where we're trying to figure this out. How do it's all the same plant, how do you put that to beneficial use? How are we viewing this industry and this plant in a more holistic way, to where we're getting as much benefit as possible? That is a problem that if other states legalize down the line, they can look to Colorado and go, they've solved that. They went through the growing pains of that. And so it's both the challenge and the opportunity. I think we live in a very privileged place to where we get to figure it out.
Yeah, and I really think we need to start moving in the direction of how are we using the plant, not does it meet this artificial divide. So if we're using it as a medicine, or as a holistic aid, or if we're using it for industrial fiber, or if we're these are, however we're using it is how we should be looking at how it's regulated, because otherwise it just doesn't really make sense, and we start making some decisions that don't have the return on investment for where we're at. Yeah, so we see that in the social justice ramifications too. Marijuana is legal, but we're still taking people's children away for it in parts of our state for use alone, and so working on a lot of those types of things as well. And I think there's still a lot to be done. And to your point, Colorado really is looked at as a leader. And so, to the marijuana industry, I frequently say, if we're going to hang our hats on states' rights, then let's make sure our state looks the way we want it to look.
Right.
Because otherwise, what's the point? And
why are we here at all?
Then it can be replicated in other states, and then we've done something right.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Cindy, this was enormously illuminating. This was a fascinating conversation. I certainly learned a lot. Tammy?
Absolutely.
So fun. Thanks for letting us talk about cannabis.
That's right. And one of my unique partners, Cindy Sovine. Find her at sovineconsulting.com. And Cindy, continued success to you in 2018.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here, and thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.